started. Welcome everyone. This webinar, so you're in the right place, is hosted by IPA and Energy Solutions for the Adjustable Block Program to discuss the traditional community solar application reopening. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Tamara Perry, Director of Solar and Storage Solutions at Energy Solutions, and I'm also joined today by Audrey Steinbach and Kelly Turner from the IPA. A few housekeeping items. Everyone is going to be muted during the presentation. If you have questions that you think of during the webinar, feel free to start to type them into your Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Please use Q&A rather than chat so we can keep track of answering as many questions as possible. And with that, I guess we'll get started. If you go to the next slide, please. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide you with more details and demonstrations for the traditional community solar program reopening. Audrey is going to start off by presenting an overview and scoring guidelines, and then I'm going to take you through a platform walkthrough as well as show you how to access support. We're also going to leave time at the end for any Q&A that comes up during the presentation. And we hope and expect today's webinar will provide a lot more valuable information to you all. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Audrey Steinbach from the Illinois Power Agency. Thank you, Audrey.
Thanks so much, Tamara. Thanks everyone for being here today. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. So to start out, I wanted to just give a quick overview of the traditional community solar category, since there are a few changes to this category since the passage of CEJA. So as noted here, traditional community solar projects may be up to 5 megawatts in size and now feature a 20-year REC contract. Traditional community solar projects are distinct from community-driven community solar projects. We now have those two distinct categories for community solar within the program, and we will really only be talking about traditional community solar today. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. Next slide, please. Okay, equity eligible contractors, or EECs for short, which are both very hard to say with the vowels there. EECs can play a role in the traditional community solar category and are actually not limited to utilizing the capacity in the EEC specific program category. So as many of you may have noticed, it is possible to gain points for your traditional community solar project if your company is an EEC certified approved vendor and or if your company partners with an EEC certified designee. So currently, approved vendors can apply to be certified as an EEC through the approved vendor application form, and a link for designees to submit an application for EEC certification is currently available as well on the Become an EEC section of the program website. And as a reminder, EECs, their definition is on this slide, and it is related to the ownership of a company or a nonprofit. Next slide, please. Next slide again. Okay, so now we're kind of going to go through the process that took us from the scoring criteria and stakeholder feedback to today. So on this slide, we have an overview of the stakeholder feedback process that took place related to the finalization of the traditional community solar scoring criteria. Earlier this fall, after the 2022 long-term plan was approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission, the agency sent out a request for stakeholder feedback on traditional community solar scoring criteria. We received comments back and then posted the final scoring guidelines and the rationale behind those guidelines earlier this month. I'd just like to say on behalf of the IPA, thank you to all the participants in the process and of all of the very thoughtful comments that we received that help us get to where we are today. Next slide, please. So the three resources here are really your keys to understanding and being prepared for application opening next Tuesday on November 1st. The final scoring guidelines contain the final scoring process and also offer helpful insight on how different scoring criterion can be met. The rationale document, on the other hand, delves into why certain decisions on scoring were made. So during the webinar today, we will not really be going into the rationale piece of this process as we have limited time, and we'll need to focus on the application submission process and making sure people are ready to go on November 1st. I did want to highlight a new document that was released on Friday, October 21st, and that is the third resource listed here. That clarifications document answers some of the questions the agency has been receiving as it relates to this traditional community solar program category and the new scoring process. And to answer a question I know quite a few people will probably have, this slide deck will be posted, and we'll make sure that these hyperlinks are available to everyone within this slide deck. Additionally, these links can also be found in the weekly announcement that went out last Friday. So one piece of this process that I do want to shed more light on is the difference between project application review and project application scoring. As has always been the case throughout the history of the program, project applications must meet a discrete set of application requirements in order to be considered eligible for a REC contract. That process has not changed here, just because there are now additional items that can be included with an application in the case that scoring occurs. So with that in mind, an application must have all required portions of a Part 1 application in order to be eligible for scoring. After application review takes place, only eligible project applications that meet all program requirements for a Part 1 traditional community solar application will move along into the scoring process. That's when the documentation and the commitments provided in the application will be reviewed for the purposes of determining the application's score. Finally, I do want to note that the agency will not entertain speculative or purposely inadequate applications that are submitted to the program. Applications should be complete at the time of submission, and approved vendors that submit speculative or incomplete applications in an effort to secure program capacity will be subject to disciplinary action, may be subject to disciplinary action. Okay, I wanted to make sure there was distinction between application review and application scoring. Next slide, please. So we'll get now into the actual scoring sections and categories that have been put forth in those final scoring documents. So as displayed here for this first category of the built environment, there are a total of 6 discrete points that are up for grabs in this section, but the maximum score permitted for this section is 4 points. For items A, B, D, and E here, there are specific definitions that the land the project is sited on must comply with in order to gain the points for one of these items. For item C here, or the commitment to utilize agrivoltaics, there is an appendix that was included at the end of the final scoring guidelines document and was also appended to the latest version of the program guidebook, where details on how to gain points for this item are outlined. So you'll see what a successful agrivoltaics plan should include there. That also includes specifics on grazing as well, as I know there were questions about that. Next slide, please. So the next scoring category is siting. As displayed here, there are a total of 6 discrete points up for grabs in this category, but the maximum score permitted here is 4 points. For each of the items listed here, they're very cut and dry, so I'll just pause on this slide for a moment, but I don't really have much to add here for citing. Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide. So scoring category number 3 is equity eligible contractors, or again, EECs. Here we have outlined the points that are available for applications that are submitted by EEC certified approved vendors, non-EEC certified approved vendors, and those approved vendors that wish to partner with EEC certified designees. For this section, the maximum point value permitted is 4 points, and by the nature of the definitions of each of the items here, approved vendors may only qualify for one of these items. Okay, next slide. So the next scoring category is interconnection status. The next 3 slides, I believe, cover interconnection status, so we'll go through each of those and pause on them so that you all can read them. They really just outline the points that are available for a project's interconnection status. The only thing that I did want to note for this section on interconnection status is that to gain the points that are offered for the top 2 queue position criterion, an executed interconnection agreement is required. So let's go on to the next slide and pause there for a moment. And then we can go on to the next slide and pause there for a moment. Okay, great. Next slide. So as noted here in this slide, in order to secure a spot on the traditional community solar waitlist, a project must receive a score of at least 5 points. Once capacity for the traditional community solar category is exceeded, any project that is seeking to be eligible for the waitlist must have a score of 5 or more points. If there are any further questions about when the waitlist threshold becomes relevant, I would point everyone to the clarifications document that was released on Friday. There is a really in-depth example there that outlines the concept of the waitlist and the point threshold that really should help clarify any confusion around when the threshold must be met in order to secure a REC contract. I really think working through that example and reading it is just the best way to understand this, as it's a little bit abstract otherwise. So I would really point people there if there's any confusion on that. Next slide, please. So this slide outlines qualification and demonstration of commitments that are seeking points through this scoring process. So really the gist of this is that if commitments are made at Part 1, demonstration of those commitments must be made at the Part 2 application. Qualification can be made and demonstrated through many different types of ways. So really what we're looking for is a commitment and confirmation of those. If a commitment is made at Part 1, we are looking for documentation and confirmation of those commitments being met at Part 2. And if what's being done at Part 1 is not the commitment, it is actually, this site is owned by a nonprofit entity, then that will need to be proved at Part 1. So there is a slight nuance between some commitments that are being made at Part 1 versus firm items that are being made or are being sought after for points at Part 1. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, application review will come before the scoring process. Once submitted applications have been reviewed for compliance with program requirements, we will begin to score projects based on the documentation submitted for achieving the various scoring criteria. Outlined here is a tentative schedule that the program plans to follow after applications are received if the block of capacity is exhausted. meaning that we will need to rank order and score projects. At the end of this process, the scores will be posted publicly as well. So we'll make sure that there's transparency there on the order of the waitlist and the different scores relevant to those projects. Next slide, please. So here we have a snippet or a screenshot from the final scoring guidelines document where there was a long table that outlined and provided guidance on how to provide documentation for each scoring criterion. Generally, the agency does not want to limit what may or may not constitute as documentation for each specific criterion, as different types of documentation can be offered for each criterion. Still, each criterion that an approved vendor wishes to be scored upon must be true of the project at the time of application. So said another way, a project will not be able to change its score after the application has been submitted. Next slide, please. So outlined here are the changes that are permitted between the Part 1 and Part 2 applications. Generally, if a change needs to occur that differs from the application materials originally provided to the program and that contributed to the score of the application, the approved vendor should always notify the program administrator of such a change. As noted here, the crops that were selected for an agrivoltaics or a pollinator plan can change, for example, but the intention to develop a site with agrivoltaics or as a pollinator-friendly site may not change, as that intention and commitment was used to score the project, which gave it an advantage as it relates to the securing of a REC contract. Lastly, any commitments that are made at Part 1 must be documented at Part 2, or the approved vendor risks removal from the REC contract. I believe that should be the end of my portion, and I will hand it back over to Tamara.
Great. Thank you so much, Audrey. Okay, so next slide. First, I'd like to walk through logistically what to expect during the TCS couple of first days of opening. So one thing to keep in mind, on a late evening of October 31st, the portal will be temporarily restricting access until it reopens at 8 a.m. Central on November 1st. At 8 a.m., the program will reopen and you will be able to begin accepting new applications, including all applications, including TCS applications. And we're considering the first day to submit applications on November 1st will be between 8 a.m. and 11:59 p.m. Central. If we reach capacity during the first day, we'll be monitoring that very closely, or this could occur following days as well. When that happens, we'll be sending a block announcement out to alert all AVs that this capacity has been reached for the TCS category. Well, we will be also, this is a little bit of a change, we'll be updating the capacity dashboard, which is on our website, more frequently during this opening period until the TCS capacity has been achieved, so that AVs can see progress of applications submitted and batched. We will also have live support on November 1st and 2nd in order to answer any questions and troubleshoot with AVs during this time period. And I'll be giving some more details on that later in the presentation. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to take you through a walkthrough of the Part 1 community solar application. I'm going to start from a little bit before Part 1 submission and take you all the way through batching and payment. So to start a new community solar TCS application, you'll navigate to the project applications pane under approved vendor, and you'll select create CS task. If you have more than one AV in your account, you'll be prompted to choose your vendor ID that you're creating the project for, and then you'll be brought to a new project applications page, which has all of the sections 1 through 7 that you're accustomed to on a project application. And then you can use the section buttons, which you can see here on the screen in green on the bottom, to navigate between sections. You don't have to complete them in order. You can skip around and save and come back to the different sections. Excuse me, next slide. Once you have saved a project application, you can navigate back to the application in the Project Applications View taskbar on the left-hand side. The application will appear in the in progress status, and to continue editing, you choose the edit icon, which is this blue icon next to step 2 on the slide. Looks like a pencil and paper. And once you have completed a section, a green checkbox will show on that section. Next slide. In section 2, project details, that is where you'll be able to choose the TCS project category. Once you do that, you'll be able to see a new section 8 TCS scoring that will appear in the application workflow. Next slide. So once you click on the section, what you're going to see, which is a little bit of a screenshot here on the right-hand side, you'll see that the TCS section is divided into 4 distinct areas that mirrors the categories that Audrey just discussed. Each section will either have checkboxes or radio buttons where you can select points that you're intending to claim, as well as a document upload section for each portion of the TCS scoring criteria. Each section also has the point allocations for each selection for reference. You'll have that easy to use. And then once you want to upload documentation, we can accept PDF, Word, zip, or JPEG files. And you're also allowed to upload multiple files for each section. So you can upload in this upload document section as many files as you like. Also note that if you upload a file, you must choose a point claim section. So you must either have a checkbox or a radio button selected, or it will not let you proceed and save the application. You're also permitted to not choose any point categories at all, and so you can skip this section altogether if you choose. Let's see. Okay, next slide. So this is a little bit more detail on how you upload this documentation. Under each section of the scoring criteria, you'll have this documentation section. To upload a document, you'll select Browse, and that will bring you a pop-up screen to select the location of the documentation on your computer, and then you can select Upload. Once you do that, you'll see the document uploaded in the section of uploaded documents. And then if you wish to delete a file, you can select the trash icon on the right-hand side of that appropriate row. Next slide. Okay, so once you've completed all 8 sections of your project application, including TCS scoring, you'll be routed to complete the final attestation and document upload steps. So these are the same steps you see for any other project category. Once you complete all of these sections, you should return to the main page by selecting Save and Continue, and then you scroll all the way down to the comments box and you find these required attestations, which you need to check off. Keep going, and next slide, sorry. You'll then be directed to scroll to the document upload section to submit both required and optional documents, such as the proof of site control that you see on this slide. After you've located the document you want uploaded, you can select Save, and the page will update with the file name and receipt date. Next slide. Once you have uploaded all of your documents, select Go Back at the top left-hand corner of your screen, and this will take you back to the main application page. I think we need one more screen. There we go. So there's a Go Back button. I'll just pause for a minute. Okay, great. So at the bottom of the page, you will then have an option to submit your project application. If the application is not complete for some reason, you'll receive, as shown here on the left, you'll receive an error message that will direct you to which sections of the applications you're missing. Otherwise, you'll see this screen that says your application has been submitted successfully with this confirmation message. Next slide. Another way to confirm that your application has been successfully submitted is to return to the project applications page. And you can see, here's an example. You can view all of your applications and you'll see submitted status. Okay, great. So now that you've submitted your application, we're going to go through how to batch and pay for that submitted application and groups of applications. Okay, so to start batching applications, you go in the left navigation menu to under vendor role, you open your batches functionality and select task, view task. Again, if you participate as multiple vendors, you'll have a second window that will pop up, which will allow you to select the appropriate vendor ID. Next screen. Okay, this will take you to a batching status screen. On this screen, you'll be able to see your batch ID, batch type, rec contract type, and status. You'll also be able to view any previously created batches. And then on the screen, you can edit any batch that has been created but not submitted. You can also create a new batch, which you can do by clicking the Create Batch button on the top right-hand side of your screen. Okay, next slide. So this is just a quick view of all of the statuses you might see when you create and submit a batch. You can use the batch status drop-down filter on that last screen to monitor your batch progress throughout any of these workflow stages. And the ideal workflow is the steps you see at the center of the screen. So created, pending payment, paid, and then approved. I'll just pause here for a second. Oh, thanks. Okay, once you've created, going back, once you've pushed that blue button, create batch button, you will first choose from the project type and the batch's contract length. And then you'll select create batch to start editing a batch. And that will bring you to a new batching page. Next slide. Okay, so this page is your main AV batching workbench. On this page, you'll be able to see all of your vendor IDs, eligible projects. So any project that matches the project and contract type that you just selected, that is in a submitted status, so anything that's not in progress and that's not already been put into a batch. At the top of the screen, you can also see a visualization of both the batch's total size as well as the expected batch fee. Okay, now I'm going to go into a little bit detail on how to use this workbench. Okay, so first you go to the batch edit screen and create a new batch by going back to saying create batch. Or you can edit an existing batch by selecting Edit Batch Graphic under the Actions column of the batching workbench. If you don't see, this is the warning here on the bottom, if you don't see a project that you want to batch, you should confirm, first of all, that it's in a submitted state, that it has not been added to a different batch, that it matches either the DG or CS type, and that it matches the rec contract type that you've selected. Okay, so now you can edit a batch by going through your projects, and you can either push the plus add or X remove button from the project row, and that will add it to your batch, and it will automatically update the batch fee and total size that will continue to be recalculating as you add potential projects to this batch. Next slide. When you've added all the project selections to a batch that you would like, you select the submit button at the top of your screen. There will then be a additional information asking the payment type. And the reason we do that is if you select credit card, additional fees will be added to your invoice. Once you submit, you'll be asked for a confirmation. And then if you select proceed, this will save and submit the batch. If you press cancel, it will take you back to the batch screen. Some other options here, if you save the batch, if you want to save the batch in progress, you select save, and that will kick you back to the last page. And if you would like to just return back to the batch page workbench, you press back. Okay, next slide. If there is an issue with your batch, you will see this pop-up screen with an explanation of the error. For example, if you submit an ineligible size, you'll see this pop-up screen, and then you'll press OK, and it'll kick you back to make additional changes to your batch. If your batch was successful, you'll see this confirmation message. Very important to note, this is the step once you have batch submitted successfully message that will create the timestamp for your submission. And this is the point at which capacity will be allocated from the program. Okay, next slide. All right, so now that you successfully submitted a batch, you should receive an email, and this is an automatic process, so it should take less than a couple of minutes. And this email will be from Stripe, which is our payment processing tool. The subject will be of the new invoice will be, the subject will be a new invoice from the Illinois Power Agency. And make sure to check your spam folder if you do not see this email. You can also request a new invoice to be sent from the administrator if you're having an issue. You can then open the invoice for details, or you can select pay this invoice to pay online. And per the program rules, you have 10 days to submit payment and 15 days to cure. And if you do not complete the payment during this time period, the PA may revoke the capacity that was allocated to the batch. Once you do once you submit payment, batch status will update to paid. Once we confirm your payment, if it's done by check or bank transfer, that will generally take about 2 business days from when we receive payment. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the payment types and how you will execute them in Stripe or through the mail. Okay, so if you're paying by check, the address is provided below. This will also be included in each invoice, so you don't have to copy it now. The check must be payable to Illinois Shines Cohen Ventures, and please include your batch ID number in the memo field. Okay, next slide. In order to pay by credit card, bank transfer, or wire transfer, you will push the Pay This Invoice button on the email from Stripe, and that will connect you directly to the Stripe website. Next slide. Okay, so paying online, first confirm that you are at this URL location. The web page will also show the same batch fee and batch ID number that was included in the email and the invoice. And then for credit card, you can enter your information and select payment to authorize. Next slide. Okay, for manual bank transfer, you'll need to log into your bank's website. Oh, I'm sorry, this is showing credit card payment. So this is where you would put in your credit card information and press pay. Next slide. For manual bank transfer, you'll need to log into your bank's website and authorize a bank-to-bank ACH transaction. So you'll follow the information that's provided. Don't use this test information. Next slide. To set up an ACH direct debit, you can select US bank account option. And if you don't have a linked bank account to Stripe, you will have to go through a bank verification process. So you choose the appropriate linked account and then select pay once that's set up. Okay, next slide. If you've completed a ACH direct debit, that's where you select pay. That's what it looks like. Next slide. Okay. If you do credit card or ACH direct debit, you will see a payment confirmation page that looks like this. And you can, at this page, select a download receipt button to get a PDF receipt of your payment. Next slide. So if you opted to pay via check or manual bank transfer, as we mentioned previously, you can allow for a little bit of additional time for mailing and processing. For all of the different types of payments, the PA is going to update the batch status in the program platform. You'll see payment pending to paid. Okay, now that concludes my walkthrough for today. I'm going to move on to PA support during the next couple of critical weeks. Next slide. So in terms of resources, we first will publish this webinar, slides, and Q&A on the website. That's linked here. There's also a submission guide and scoring guidelines and rationale that's already posted and linked here. We also will be hosting extended office hours. So this is really for the purpose of supporting AVs experiencing technical difficulties or resolving other challenges. The office hours are meant to answer questions and provide support. Our upcoming office hours are really planned for these topic areas. There's a lot more dates that are expected to follow. So especially for the TCS and batching office hours, really asking that AVs come with those critical questions so we can triage and help AVs that have really urgent issues or questions related to submission for batching or TCS. And we can troubleshoot those as soon as possible. Okay, great. I really appreciate your time today. And oh, I'm sorry, I have one more slide. This is just a mention for our sector strategy team. You can always email general and ongoing technical support questions to our admin email. You can also email directly to a sector strategist. If you have questions, you can email the communitysolar@illinoisavp.com email address, and we'll get those questions addressed quickly. So appreciate everyone's time today, and I will open the floor for Q&A. Audrey or Mike, is there any questions that we can cover here? And I apologize, I have not been monitoring the Q&A while I've been presenting.
Sure, I'm gonna share some that I hope are easily answered by the team and keep things moving. Are approved vendors who are equity eligible contractors automatically qualified as an EEC designee?
Thanks, Mike. That's a good question. Obviously, the program will have, the EEC application for the approved vendor on file. But one thing that we really need to see in the Part 1 application process, if you are being utilized as an EEC designee for a different approved vendor, we would like to see confirmation of this commitment through either a contract, an attestation, some sort of agreement that shows that both the approved vendor and the designee are in agreement about the work that is going to be done and the points that are sought under that category 3 for scoring.
Okay, wonderful. Audrey, I'm going to share some questions that I think are specific to some of the criteria, if that's okay. Does site control have to be recorded with a receipt from the local county clerk in order to be eligible to have legal binding site control on a particular property? Is that one you can speak to at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm going to back up a little bit and reference the program guidebook, because this sounds like very specific to one project situation for that locality. And the requirement for the Part 1 application really is that the authority having jurisdiction for the locality, any permits or agreements or anything that is required by that AHJ must be included at the Part 1 application. So hopefully that answers it.
Okay, thank you. And I'm gonna keep going if that's okay with you, including some of our questions that came in earlier in the session. Can an EEC buy a community solar project that was submitted to traditional community solar that doesn't have a REC contract award and then put it into the EEC block so long as it holds the REC contract for 6 years? Is that one you can address?
That's one that I kind of want to take into the final Q&As that we'll kind of type up and produce within this week for this webinar. I want to double check a few different places where we've spoken about this, and I just can't do that right now in the webinar.
Okay, I've made a note of that. I'll share another if that's okay. Though unlikely, if only 50 megawatts get 5s or above in Group B community solar, but 300 megawatts go in on November 1st, that is, there are 250 megawatts of sub 5-point applications, then how are the remaining 50 megawatts of contracts awarded? Does a 4 beat a 3, or is it randomized according to the question?
Hey, Mike, this is Kelly. I can take this one.
Yeah.
So in the clarifications document that was published on Friday, we have a pretty thorough explanation of how the scoring in the wait list will work, and how the wait list will be triggered. The wait list will be triggered when the megawatts applied to the program exceeds the waitlist capacity. And then all projects will be scored from that day forward. So in this, what I think is extremely unlikely scenario, if project applications received exceed capacity, that triggers scoring for all projects moving forward. So any project that is submitted that does not meet the minimum waitlist requirement would not receive a REC contract, and then we would move through the waitlist by date and score.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. I want to share an amendment to a response that issued and slide content. I've been alerted that there is no maximum file size limit at the moment for upload. We will confirm that and share that in the Q&A as well, but we did earlier refer to a 20 megabyte limit, and the alert I'm getting is that that's not applicable. So we'll firmly confirm that. And thank you, Kelly. I'm going to pose another question, if I may. In the latest guidance, the IPA has clarified that EECs may not utilize nested designees that are not also EEC designees to meet EEC utilization requirements for tiebreaker points. Can you please confirm that if an EEC designee uses any subcontractor that is not also an EEC designee, or their subcontractor, that precludes the project from taking points under any EEC category? Is that one the team can address? Or alternatively, in a post-session follow-up?
I think that one might be best suited for a follow-up, mainly because I was typing the answer to a different question while you were saying that. Sorry, Mike. But I think some of these questions that can kind of get a little bit longer and where more explanation would be helpful, I think a follow-up document might be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Would you like me to continue with a few more questions that may be more easily managed now, or given some of the volume?
Yes, I think that's fine, and I will promise to listen and stop typing.
Okay.
Mike, I have one here that I can clarify. There's a question about bank verification processes taking 5 business days to test with a debit or credit card. If a payment is not received by 11:59 on 11/1, does that push the application into another day? And so here, the answer here is no. The timestamp that we are most concerned about, or that is providing the confirmation for capacity allocation, is when you press that batch submit button. Because there are different time periods for different types of payment processes, in order to make it the most equitable, that batch submittal button is when your batch will be allocated capacity. Again, as I mentioned, if you don't follow up with payment within the appropriate time period, that capacity will get removed. But that batch submitted, that timestamp is what we're taking as the allocation date and time. And I think there was another question here about what is the purpose of batching, and when would you use the batching function? And again, if you want to have allocation of capacity for your project and move your project into the next statuses to receive a REC contract, the first step after you submit an application is to batch it. So that's a really important step, especially for TCS. You must batch your project before it is considered fully submitted and your allocated capacity. So hopefully that answers those two questions.
Great, Tamara. We got a question I want to pose to you about whether we accept American Express. I don't know if that was spoken to you directly. Is that something you can answer? Okay, maybe we can revisit that one. I have a question.
Oh, shoot.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
was
Mike.
that
I
me?
was I was muted. I believe American Express is accepted. Let me just go back into our Stripe and verify. But Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and Discover, I think, are the 4 credit card payments that are accepted. But let me just verify that.
And we can include that in the post
Yeah.
within our Q&A. I've
Great.
got another one I'm hoping the agency can speak to. Can you please confirm that if a community solar project is aiming to get points under the contaminated, disturbed, or brownfield category, that the site plan must show the project is 100% sited over the contaminated, disturbed, or brownfield area? Is that something the agency is in position to respond to?
That is a really good question, Mike. I think that's one that we'll probably want to take under review and provide a written response, just because I think there are varying degrees of contamination. And 100% contamination looks a lot different than 1% contamination. So we'll issue a response on that one this week.
Okay, wonderful. Another one, if may I keep going? Has the agency got time for a few more questions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Provided it meets the 50% footprint requirement and is properly documented, is planting and harvesting hay an acceptable form of agrivoltaics?
So I will point anyone that has questions on the agrivoltaics portion of the scoring criteria to the appendix that was at the end of the final scoring guidelines. And that appendix has also been included in the recently re-released version of the program guidebook. You'll see what should and shouldn't be included in the agrivoltaics plan. And then also I would mention, if people are particularly interested in how grazing applies and what to include in an agrivoltaics plan that works towards grazing, to review the clarifications document that went out on Friday. There's a ton of information there that I can't really summarize succinctly and briefly here, so I would just say to look to those.
Great, thank you, Audrey. Tamara, do you have any ready that you want to tackle right now, or would you like me to search for a couple more here?
Yeah, why don't you keep going? There's another question on application fee check, similar question around when the application fee is sent, if it's a check. Again, it's going back to the batch submission date. That's the most important date for capacity allocation. And then you have those 10 days to pay. If you have another one, Mike, let me keep scrolling through here. I'll see if there's another one I can answer.
Yeah, let me read one for the agency's guidance if possible. The program guidebook states that all community solar projects will need to provide the school district that the project is located in. In the application form, it just asks, is the project located at a public school? Will we need to provide the school district and school IDs of all schools within a district that a community solar project exists?
No, so that question is specific to the public schools category in terms of the district, the school, and the type of school. So for traditional community solar, if the question states, is it located on a public school, that should just be a simple yes or no. Otherwise, that additional information will not be required. There's one other question that I can touch on. So there was a question that says, how long after November 1st will we know if projects got capacity or have curative items? Is it 4 weeks? So I would direct everyone back to the schedule. I forget exactly which slide it's on, but the tentative schedule for both application review and then application scoring. So again, the iterative steps in that process are we will receive applications, we'll review those applications for the requirements for traditional and community solar applications. Then after that, there will be a cure period, as there always is with applications. Then we'll have our universe of projects that will be able to be scored, right? We'll go through the scoring process, we'll provide a cure period for scoring, and then finally we will have our final group of projects, right? So because we have both an application review process and an application scoring process, we do have quite a long process until we get to the end and really know which projects are moving forward here versus which ones are waitlisted. So this whole slide basically answers that question. And again, is tentative and does depend on both the quality and the quantity of applications that are received.
Okay, thank you. If it's okay, I'll pose another question. Under the top 2 queue position clarifications, the IPA states interconnection agreements must be both executed and valid, meaning not expired. Can you confirm that applies to the signed ISA as well?
Mike, this is Kelly. I'm not exactly sure with what they're referring to in terms of the ISA. So if that attendee who submitted that question, they submitted it anonymously, so I can't follow up with them. But if you could please let us know what you're referring to when you say ISA, that would be helpful in answering that.
Okay, thank you. Kelly, are there other questions you've noted that it's a good chance to pause and let you jump in on now, or would you like me to look for others that I can offer?
I saw a few that were about the portal that I was hoping that maybe Tamara could answer.
I did get one clarification, Kelly, while we look for some of those. ISA, I meant to say interconnection agreement. Does that help?
Okay, so the question is under the top 2 queue position clarification, the IPA states interconnection agreements must both be executed and valid, meaning not expired. Can you confirm that applies to the interconnection agreement as well? If that's the question, yes, the interconnection must be signed, meaning executed, and valid, meaning not expired. If the question is whether or not you need to have an interconnection agreement to get points for the top 2 queue position, the answer to that question is yes, and that was included in our clarifications document that was published on Friday as well.
Great, thank you so much, Kelly. Tamara, do you have some
Yeah.
portal questions you'd like to go with? Thank you.
Yeah, I did see one question around contingency planning, meaning if there's something that goes wrong with either the platform or some sort of outside event. And without going into too much detail about our contingency planning, I want to avoid any potential gaming. Just want to let hopefully reassure AVs here that we do have contingency plans in place. That's always good planning to know kind of different outcomes based on something unusual happening. So from a risk management perspective, we do have several tiers of issues and pathways for how we're going to address that. And if there are, let's say, a major bug or some sort of outage that affects all of Illinois, we will be communicating with AVs, and we'll make sure that everyone has an equitable pathway to submitting an application. So hopefully that helps to answer that question. Let's see.
I have one that while you're looking tomorrow, maybe I think as a quick response.
Yeah, go ahead.
to confirm, if a project application is completed and batched on November 1, but then paid for sometime within the next 10 days, it will still be registered as a November 1 application and not the date that payment was received.
Correct. So the timestamp that is important here is when a batch is submitted. So once you complete your Part 1 application, you put it into a batch and you complete your batching, that is when you will get allocated capacity. So not when payment is received, because there is those variances in how long it takes for certain payments to go through. There's another question here about additional fees for credit card payment. Those are outlined in the guidebook. I believe it's 2.9%. So that is what would get tacked on to the batch fee. That's a question from Andrew. Let's see. So there's a question about starting a TCS application prior to November 1. At this time, you do not have the availability to start a TCS application. So we need to start that on November 1st. But you can see in the current community solar applications, all of the different sections 1 through 7. And then section 8 would be what we went over today in terms of the scoring criteria and uploading documentation. Mike, any others that you're seeing here on the platform? Let's see.
I don't know that there are any other platform questions. There are some questions about publication of the Q&A, and I know we're pledging to get those completed as quickly as possible upon a full review. So recognizing everybody will looking for rapid answers, we will move quickly with the agency to get those out.
There's a question here about where to pay by check. There's a slide on this presentation that has the address. It will also be included in the invoice that you receive when you batch. So at the sorry about that, at the bottom of the invoice, you'll see the address that you can send the amount to. And just again, as a reminder, make sure to include the batch ID in the check memo. That'll help us track the check easily.
Okay, I've got that information on the screen right now for folks. To the agency, knowing we're almost at time, are there other questions that you believe you can readily answer or that would be well served answering right now versus in follow-up question and the answer documentation?
I think I'll just repeat again. I do see a few questions that are in the chat regarding how will capacity be selected or how will things be prioritized. So I just want to be very, very clear that in the clarifications document that was released on Friday, there is a very long example of when scoring begins, when waitlist threshold scoring applies, and when it does not. So I would encourage folks to review that document because I think there's an anonymous question here that's asking about, you know, how is selection done? So the main thing is that these scoring guidelines don't come into play until we exceed capacity and we need to rank projects. So that is the general ruling principle, but really reviewing that example I think will be helpful.
Okay, wonderful. And recognizing that was just sent at near the close business on Friday, probably some people still looking at that. I wanted to repeat also that we've got some upcoming office hours, including Wednesday, the 26th at 10 a.m. Central Prevailing Time. I'm going to hand it back over to our panelists, and I'll pull up a closing slide there as well, too, knowing we'll also be getting underway on very thoughtful questions that are submitted. But thanks for referring again to the clarifications, Audrey. Tamara, Audrey, Kelly, back to you.
I don't have any last thoughts, just please, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out via our admin email or to our sector strategists. We're here to help answer questions and we'll be sending out this Q&A document as well as the slides as soon as we can. So really appreciate all of your participation today, and we will hopefully be talking with you soon. Thank you so much.